Brielle Thompson stood rigidly by her luxury SUV, wrists bound in handcuffs, red and blue lights flickering against her dark skin. Officer Kyle Mercer, smug and unyielding, yanked the cuffs tighter, ignoring her calm but steady gaze. "Bet you—" "Regret mouthing off now," he sneered. Brielle didn't flinch. Instead, her voice was cold, deliberate. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your career." Before Mercer could reply, another patrol car screeched to a halt. Captain Elena Morales stepped out, her face draining of color as recognition hit. "Do you even know who she is?" she hissed at Mercer. His cocky smirk faltered. Brielle's lips curled into the faintest smile. This isn't over, but how did it come to this? What pushed a simple traffic stop into a career-ending disaster? Let's rewind 12 hours and find out. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. If you stand for justice and accountability, hit like and subscribe for more stories like this. The sun rose lazily over Danton City, casting long golden rays through the tall windows of Brielle Thompson's modern apartment. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as she stood by the counter, scrolling through news updates on her tablet. Another headline flashed across the screen: "Community tensions rise amid police profiling allegations." Brielle sighed, shaking her head. Same story, different day. Her phone buzzed beside her coffee mug. Malcolm, her brother. She picked up, balancing the phone between her shoulder and ear while she flipped through a stack of case files. "Morning, Mal. What's up?" "Just making sure my favorite civil rights attorney hasn't burned the city down yet," Malcolm teased, his voice light but edged with concern. "Saw the news? You're poking the bear again, Brie," Brielle chuckled. "If the bear stops harassing innocent people, I'll stop poking. Simple as that." "Simple?" Malcolm's tone hardened. "These people don't play fair, Brielle. You think Mercer and his buddies don't know exactly who you are? You're making enemies." Brielle took a slow sip of coffee, her gaze drifting to the framed law degree hanging on the wall. Harvard Law, top of her class. She'd worked too hard and seen too much to back down now. "If we don't fight, Mal, who will?" Malcolm sighed on the other end. "Just watch your back, promise me that. Watch your back." "Always," Brielle replied, though she knew it was a promise easier said than kept. An hour later, she was dressed sharply in a tailored navy blue pantsuit, her natural curls pinned back into an elegant bun. Today was the City Council's conference on police reform, an event Brielle had helped organize. She grabbed her leather briefcase, mentally ticking off her to-do list as she headed out the door. Traffic was light, and the drive to City Hall was smooth. But halfway there, she noticed something in her rearview mirror, a patrol car cruising a little too closely. Brielle frowned, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. Just a coincidence, she told herself. Cops patrolled all the time. But when she switched lanes, the patrol car mirrored her move. Her heart skipped a beat. "Relax," she muttered under her breath. "You're not breaking any laws." The patrol car eventually veered off at the next exit, and Brielle exhaled, brushing off the unease crawling up her spine. She'd dealt with worse. It wasn't the first time she'd been tailed, and it probably wouldn't be the last. The conference went as expected. Panel discussions, impassioned speeches, and the usual political tightrope walking. Brielle spoke last, delivering a blistering critique of unchecked police power and the urgent need for accountability. The audience applauded, but Brielle couldn't ignore the cold stare from the uniformed officers stationed at the back of the room. Mercer wasn't among them, but his presence lingered like a shadow. Afterward, while packing up her notes, Councilwoman Denise Herrera, one of Brielle's strongest allies, approached her with a tight smile. "Powerful speech, Brielle, but you're making people nervous, important people." "That's the point," Brielle replied, slipping her laptop into her briefcase. "Nervous people make changes. Comfortable people don't." Herrera sighed. "Just be careful. They're watching." Brielle forced a smile, pretending the warning didn't unnerve her. Let them watch. By the time she headed home, dusk had settled over the city. Her phone buzzed again. Malcolm. "You good?" he asked without preamble. "Yeah, just leaving now." "Don't drive distracted," Malcolm warned, "and keep an eye out." Brielle rolled her eyes, but her smile softened. "Yes, big brother. Love you. Love you too. Call me when you're home." As she navigated through the dimly lit streets, her earlier unease returned. Another patrol car appeared in her mirror. Different from the morning, but unmistakably deliberate. It followed her for 6 blocks before turning off without incident. Brielle's jaw tightened. Coincidence, maybe or maybe not. The soft hum of Brielle's SUV filled the quiet night as she drove through the familiar streets of Danton City, the glow of streetlights flickering past her windows. She was only 10 minutes from home when the flash of red and blue lights flooded her rearview mirror. Heart sinking, she glanced up to see a patrol car tailing her, sirens silent but lights blazing. Her mind immediately sharpened. Not again. Brielle inhaled slowly, pulling to the side of the road with practiced calm. She had given lectures on how to handle situations like this. Keep your hands visible, remain polite, document everything, if possible. But knowing the playbook didn't soften the dread tightening her chest. The driver's side door of the patrol car opened, and out stepped Officer Kyle Mercer. The same smug face she'd seen at more community meetings than she could count. He took his time approaching, flashlight in hand, beam cutting through the night and straight into her face. "License and registration," Mercer ordered, voice clipped, authoritative. Brielle blinked against the glare. "Good evening, officer. May I ask why I was pulled over?" Mercer's lips curved into a mockery of a smile. "License and registration," he repeated, completely ignoring her question. Suppressing a sigh, Brielle moved slowly, deliberately. No sudden movements. One hand on the wheel, the other reaching toward the glove compartment. She retrieved her documents and handed them over, her fingers brushing against Mercer's gloved hand. His eyes didn't leave her face as he accepted them, the flashlight still trained on her. "I'd like to know the reason for the stop," Brielle pressed, her tone steady but firm. Mercer didn't blink. "Suspicious vehicle. Gotta be sure it's not stolen." Brielle's jaw tightened. Suspicious? A black woman in a luxury SUV, her own SUV, was suspicious? The implication was clear, but she swallowed the retort rising in her throat. Arguing. Here now wouldn't win her anything but trouble. Mercer stepped back without another word, retreating to his patrol car. Brielle watched in the side mirror as he lingered longer than necessary, clearly not just running her plates, but stalling. This wasn't about a traffic violation. It was a power play. He was testing her. Minutes dragged by. 5, then 10. Brielle's fingers tapped rhythmically on the steering wheel, her breathing slow and measured. She'd handled worse. This would pass. But when Mercer returned, his posture had shifted. Gone was the routine detachment of a traffic stop. His hand now rested casually on the edge of his belt near his holster. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, voice flat. Brielle's brows knitted together. "Excuse me? On what grounds?" "Suspicious behavior," Mercer snapped, his patience clearly manufactured to run out exactly at this moment. "Step out now." Suspicious behavior, the catch-all justification. Brielle knew that phrase too well. It didn't matter how well she dressed, how many degrees hung on her office wall, or how spotless her record was. Out here in the dark, on the side of the road, none of it shielded her from being seen as a threat. Brielle glanced around. The street was empty, no witnesses, no cameras she could see. Her gut twisted. She could argue, push back, demand her rights. But she also knew how quickly those situations escalated. She had represented too many grieving families to believe this could end without harm if she resisted. With measured precision, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, heels clicking softly against the asphalt. The night air was sharp against her skin. "Turn around," Mercer instructed, already pulling out his handcuffs. Brielle blinked. "Is this an arrest?" Her voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. "What are the charges?" Mercer grinned. "Detainment. Suspicious activity. We'll sort it out downtown." Her mind raced. This was harassment, plain and simple. Mercer didn't have cause, didn't have evidence, but he did have authority. And in moments like this, authority trumped justice. The wrong move, the wrong word, and she'd be another headline. Slowly she turned, placing her hands behind her back without waiting for the command. The cold bite of metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. "Ma'am," Mercer drawled mockingly. "Do you have anything on you that could harm me?" Brielle almost laughed at the absurdity but bit her tongue. "No." "Any outstanding warrants?" This time she did laugh, soft, humorless. "Absolutely not." Mercer's grip tightened as he finished locking the cuffs. But just as he secured the last clasp, the hum of another engine cut through the silence. A second patrol car pulled up, headlights, bright and unforgiving. The door swung open and out stepped Captain Elena Morales. The moment Morales' eyes landed on Brielle, recognition flickered across her face, quickly followed by horror. "Mercer," she barked, striding toward them. "What the hell is going on here?" Mercer didn't flinch. "Routine stop. Suspicious behavior." "Suspicious?" Morales hissed, eyes narrowing. "Do you know who she is?" Mercer hesitated, finally looking at Brielle as if truly seeing her for the first time. Brielle met his gaze, calm but sharp. "Brielle Thompson," Morales snapped. "Civil rights attorney, the governor's legal advisor. The woman testifying before the Oversight Committee next week about racial profiling in this department." Mercer's face paled. The power he'd wielded so confidently only moments ago slipped through his fingers like sand. She didn't answer my questions directly," he stammered, scrambling for control. "Uncuff her," Morales ordered, voice cutting like glass. When Mercer hesitated, she stepped forward, practically nose to nose with him. "Now, officer." Reluctantly, Mercer pulled the key from his belt and unlocked the cuffs. Brielle rubbed her wrists, feeling the warmth of blood returning to her skin. Her heartbeat had steadied now, fury replacing fear. Mercer muttered under his breath, "You could have just complied from the start." That did it. Brielle stepped closer, eyes locking onto his. "I did comply. I followed every instruction. I handed over my license. I asked why I was stopped, and you couldn't answer. Instead, you saw a black woman driving a nice car and assumed she didn't belong." Mercer's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. Morales cut in, voice sharp. "Get back to your patrol, Mercer. We'll discuss this in my office." Mercer hesitated, pride warring with common sense. But eventually he turned on his heel and stalked back to his car, slamming the door shut. Brielle exhaled slowly, the adrenaline still burning in her veins. Morales stepped closer, eyes softening. "I'm sorry, Brielle. I wish I'd gotten here sooner." Brielle's smile was tight. "Soon enough." As she returned to her car, adjusting her blazer with slow, deliberate movements, her mind raced. Mercer had crossed a line tonight, one she couldn't ignore. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who didn't have a title, a law degree, or a captain who recognized them in time. How many others had Mercer bullied into silence? And how many more would suffer if she let this go? Comment number 1. If you believe Brielle was right to push back against this abuse of power. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe no one should be targeted because of the color of their skin. But what happens when someone like Mercer refuses to back down? When the system itself closes ranks to protect its own? Stay tuned, because this fight is far from over. The morning sun filtered through Brielle's apartment windows, casting long streaks of light across her polished hardwood floors. For a moment, everything seemed normal, calm, safe. But that illusion shattered the second she stepped outside. Her heart sank at the sight of her SUV. Both driver-side tires were slashed, the rubber sagging onto the pavement. Across the sleek black paint, in jagged red spray paint, someone had scrawled a word that made her stomach twist. "Know your place." Brielle stood frozen, jaw tightening as neighbors glanced her way before quickly looking down, pretending not to see. Of course they saw, but no one wanted to get involved. She didn't blame them. This wasn't just vandalism. It was a message. Her phone was already in her hand before she fully registered dialing. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered, voice crisp and detached. This is Brielle Thompson, she said, forcing calm into her voice. My vehicle's been vandalized. I need an officer to... The dispatcher cut her off. Address? Brielle rattled it off, gripping the phone tighter as she glanced at the hateful words staining her car. The dispatcher paused, then sighed audibly. We'll send someone when available. When available? Brielle echoed. disbelief flaring. "There's been a crime. I'm reporting vandalism and intimidation." "Yes, ma'am," the dispatcher replied, tone clipped. "An officer will respond when they can." The line went dead. Brielle lowered the phone slowly, bile rising in her throat. She already knew what was happening. This wasn't just random thuggery. It was retaliation, plain and simple. Mercer's power play didn't end with the cuffs last night. It was escalating. Frustration boiling, she snapped pictures of the damage, careful to capture the slashed tires, the spray-painted slur, and the empty street around her. Evidence, always collect evidence. That rule had saved her in court countless times, and she wasn't about to forget it now. 2 hours passed before a patrol car finally rolled up. The officer who stepped out was young, fresh-faced, and wearing the same badge Mercer wore. His gaze swept over the SUV before settling on Brielle, expression already bored. "Morning, ma'am," he drawled, pulling out a notepad. "You the one who called about the graffiti?" Graffiti, as if this were just kids tagging a wall for fun. Brielle crossed her arms tightly. "And the tires, and the clear threat." The officer scribbled something lazily, not even glancing, at the words scrawled across the SUV. "Any cameras around here?" "No," Brielle said evenly, "but I have photos, and I'd like to file a formal report." The officer looked up, eyes narrowing. "A report, huh? Well, without witnesses or footage, there's not much we can do. Probably just some kids messing around." "Kids?" Brielle's voice sharpened. "Do kids usually target specific people with slurs after an encounter with one of your officers?" The officer's jaw twitched, but he didn't answer. Instead, he flipped his notepad shut. "I'll log it, ma'am. If anything else happens, give us a call." "That's it?" Brielle asked, incredulous. He shrugged. "Like I said, no witnesses, no footage. Good luck with the insurance claim." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Brielle standing beside, her vandalized SUV, fists clenched at her sides. This wasn't negligence, it was deliberate indifference. The message was loud and clear. "We can reach you and no one's coming to help." Later that morning, after a tow truck hauled her SUV to the shop, Brielle arrived at her office, laptop in hand, still simmering with frustration. She barely had time to set down her coffee when her assistant Maya rushed in, face pale. "Brielle," Maya blurted, "you need to see this." Brielle followed her to the reception desk, where Maya pointed at her computer screen. An official-looking email from the State Bar Association sat open. The subject line hit like a punch to the gut. "Notice of Ethics Investigation. Brielle Thompson." Brielle's stomach dropped. "What?" she whispered, snatching the mouse to scroll through the email. The complaint was vague. Concerns regarding professional conduct and case management practices, but it didn't need specifics to be damaging. This wasn't just petty vandalism anymore. This was a full-scale character attack. Maya hovered anxiously. "Who would—" "Mercer," Brielle muttered, her mind already racing. He had connections, friends in the department, people who could pull strings and file anonymous complaints. This was designed to discredit her, to tie her up in red tape while the real battle raged outside. Phone in hand, she called Malcolm. He answered on the second ring. "Bree, what's wrong?" "They're coming for me," she said flatly. "Vandalized. My car. Filed a bogus ethics complaint. They're not just harassing me, they're trying to ruin me." Malcolm swore under his breath. "I told you, Bree, you're making enemies. You need to back off before they—" "Before they what?" Brielle snapped. "Destroy everything I've worked for, silence me, that's exactly why I can't back off." There was a long pause. Finally, Malcolm sighed. "Okay, what's the plan?" Brielle's jaw tightened. "We fight back. I'm not letting Mercer or his buddies win." But even as she spoke, she glanced out the office window and froze. Parked across the street was a familiar patrol car, engine idling, headlights off. Watching, Brielle swallowed, hard dread curling in her gut. This wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Brielle Thompson barely had time to process the ethics complaint when another email hit her inbox. An invitation to speak at a high-profile fundraising gala for police reform. The event, hosted by a coalition of civil rights organizations, would be packed with city officials, activists, and media. a perfect platform to expose the harassment she was facing. Malcolm was skeptical when she told him, "You really think calling them out publicly won't backfire? Mercer's already gunning for you." Brielle's voice was firm. "If they're going to destroy my reputation, I won't go down quietly." The night of the gala, Brielle stood, tall in a sleek black dress, her poise unshaken despite the weight pressing on her chest. She delivered a speech that cut through the crowd's polite murmurs like a scalpel, detailing systemic racism, abuse of power, and the thin blue line that protected bad cops. She didn't name Mercer, but everyone who mattered knew who her words were aimed at. Applause erupted as she stepped down from the podium. But in the back of the room, two men in uniform stood motionless, their eyes locked on her. One of them, Officer Reed, was Mercer's closest ally. The knot in Brielle's stomach tightened. After the event, she lingered to network, shaking hands and exchanging business cards. It wasn't until she slipped into her SUV and started the engine that the flash of red and blue lights appeared behind her. Again, Brielle's breath caught. Not tonight, not after that speech. She pulled over, heart pounding. This time it wasn't just one patrol car, two. Officer Mercer himself approached, flanked by Reed. His smile was wolfish under the harsh glare of the streetlights. "Evening." "Ms. Thompson," Mercer drawled. "Taillights out." Brielle blinked. "No, it's not." Mercer shrugged, unconcerned. "Step out of the vehicle." Her fingers curled around the steering wheel. "I know my rights, officer. You need probable cause to— or step out," Mercer snapped, hand drifting toward his holster. Reed shifted beside him, eyes sharp. Brielle inhaled slowly. There was no winning this fight here on the side of the road with no cameras and no witnesses. She reached for her phone to record, but Mercer was faster. He yanked the door open and grabbed her arm, hauling her out. "Resisting, huh?" Mercer sneered. "Bad move, counselor." "Are you insane?" Brielle shouted, struggling to keep her footing in heels. "I'm not resisting." Reed stepped in, grabbing her other arm. The cold bite of handcuffs snapped around her wrists before she could protest further. "You're under arrest for resisting a lawful order," Mercer announced, loud enough for passing cars to hear. His grin widened as he added, "and possession of a controlled substance." Brielle froze. "What? That's absurd." Mercer leaned in, voice low. "You really thought you could embarrass me in front of half the city and walk away clean?" Reed reached into Brielle's purse, which had fallen to the ground during the scuffle. He pulled out a small baggie, white powder glinting under the streetlight. Brielle's blood ran cold. "That's not mine. You planted that." "Tell it to the judge," Mercer said, practically humming with satisfaction. He shoved her toward the patrol car, ignoring her protests. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, some filming with their phones. Brielle's heart pounded. She had spent years defending innocent people from setups like this. Now she was the one being shoved into the back of a squad car, humiliated and helpless. At the precinct, they denied her a phone call. Standard intimidation tactic. Brielle sat on the cold bench in the holding cell, head spinning. This wasn't just harassment. This was character assassination, designed to destroy her credibility completely. Hours passed. Just before dawn, Captain Morales appeared, face taut with fury. "Mercer told me you were caught with cocaine. I didn't believe it. I checked. The evidence log." Her lips pressed into a thin line. The baggie was logged in under Mercer's name, from a previous case. Brielle's eyes narrowed. "So you know it's a setup," Morales hesitated. "Knowing and proving are two different things, but I'm getting you out. You'll be released without charges, this time." "This time?" Brielle echoed bitterly. "He's not done, is he?" Morales didn't answer. Instead, she unlocked the cell and led Brielle out into the pale morning light. As Brielle rubbed her sore wrists, Mercer strolled past, sipping coffee, utterly unfazed. He smirked. "Careful, Ms. Thompson. Wouldn't want you to develop a record." Brielle's fists clenched at her sides. This wasn't just about her anymore. If they could do this to her, a high-profile attorney with connections, what were they doing to people without resources? How many lives had Mercer destroyed under the cover of his badge? Comment number 1. If you believe Mercer has gone too far and should be held accountable. like subscribe and share if you believe no one should be above the law. But here's the real question. How do you fight back when the very system sworn to protect you is the one trying to destroy you? Stay tuned, because Brielle's battle is far from over. Brielle Thompson stepped out of the precinct just as the sun broke over the horizon, casting long shadows down the empty streets. Her wrists throbbed from the cuffs, and her throat burned from hours of arguing with deaf ears. Morales had kept her promise, no charges filed, but the damage was already done. Her phone buzzed incessantly as she unlocked her car, missed calls, dozens of notifications. Then the headline punched through her exhaustion like a fist. Prominent civil rights attorney arrested for drug possession during traffic stop. Brielle's breath caught. The article, already viral, painted her as a hypocrite. It framed the arrest as part of an ongoing investigation into her conduct. Mercer's fingerprints were all over the narrative. By the time she reached her apartment, the story had spread like wildfire. News vans idled down the street, cameras angled toward her building. She slipped in through the underground garage, heart pounding. Inside, Malcolm was pacing her living room, phone pressed to his ear. He spun the moment she entered. "I've been calling you all night. What the hell happened?" Brielle dropped onto the couch, head in her hands. "They planted drugs. Mercer set me up." Malcolm cursed under his breath, ending his call. "I warned you, Brie. I told you they'd come for you. But this? They're not just trying to intimidate you. They're trying to destroy you." "I know," Brielle muttered, voice tight. "And it's working." Her email inbox was flooded. Several clients had already politely postponed meetings. A handful outright cancelled. But the worst blow came from her law firm. An official email, cold and detached. "Effective immediately, you are placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the ethics investigation and recent criminal allegations. We appreciate your cooperation during this sensitive time." Brielle stared at the screen, numb. She had given everything to that firm. Late nights, weekends, victories that shaped state policy. And now, suspended. Just like that. Malcolm leaned over her shoulder, reading the email. He let out a bitter laugh. They couldn't wait to distance themselves. Cowards. Brielle's phone buzzed again. This time it was Councilwoman Denise Herrera, the same woman who had praised her speech days earlier. Brielle hesitated but answered. "Brielle," Herrera began, voice strained. "I just saw the news. This looks bad." "It is bad." Brielle shot back. "You know those charges were bogus. You've seen Mercer in action." "I believe you," Herrera said quickly. "But the city council? They're under pressure. Sponsors are pulling support for the police reform initiative. They're asking me to remove you from the committee. I'm so sorry." Brielle's hand tightened around the phone. "You're cutting me loose?" "I don't have a choice," Herrera whispered. "They're saying you're a liability now." The line went dead. Brielle lowered the phone slowly, disbelief washing over her. Everything she had built, every platform she had fought for, was crumbling in real time. Mercer hadn't just attacked her reputation, he was systematically erasing her influence. The final blow came that afternoon. While Brielle sifted through paperwork for her lawsuit against the department, her assistant Maya called, voice shaking. "Brielle, you need to get down here. There's an audit team going through your case files. They're saying it's part of the ethics investigation." Brielle's stomach dropped. "What? They can't just..." "They've got a court order," Maya interrupted. "They're pulling files, Brielle, everything, even the sealed ones." Brielle's mind raced. Some of those files contained sensitive information about ongoing civil rights cases that directly implicated officers like Mercer. If those documents fell into the wrong hands, witnesses could be exposed, lives could be ruined. She grabbed her keys and bolted for the door, barely registering the patrol car. Parked across the street, same one as before, watching, waiting. By the time Brielle arrived at her office, the damage was done. File boxes lined the hallway, each one marked with a fluorescent tag, evidence. Uniformed officers, none she recognized, moved methodically, ignoring her entirely. Maya stood frozen by the reception desk, eyes wide. "They wouldn't let me stop them," she murmured. They said you'd be notified through official channels. Brielle clenched her fists. This wasn't an investigation. It was a purge. Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. You should have stayed quiet. This is only the beginning. Brielle stared at the screen, cold fury spreading through her chest. They weren't just trying to silence her. They were dismantling everything she stood for piece by piece. And the worst part? Her allies, the people who once stood beside her, were retreating. One by one. The system was closing in, suffocating her fight under the weight of manufactured scandal and whispered threats. Brielle exhaled slowly, gaze hardening. They wanted her powerless, they wanted her afraid, but they'd underestimated her resolve. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. Brielle sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by scattered case files and legal briefs, each one a reminder of the life she had built, and the life Mercer was hell-bent on tearing apart. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications, news alerts about her suspension, emails from nervous clients, and texts from colleagues who had once praised her but now offered nothing but hollow silence. The message from the unknown number still lingered on her screen. You should have stayed quiet. This is only the beginning. Her apartment, once a sanctuary, felt suffocating. She needed air. Grabbing her keys, Brielle stepped outside into the cool evening, determined to clear her head. But as she approached her SUV, she froze. The windows were shattered. Glass glittered on the pavement like tiny shards of betrayal. Across the hood, spray-painted in bold, dripping letters, "Drop it or else." Brielle's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a direct threat. Shaking with fury, she called the police. The dispatcher's voice, flat and uninterested, responded, "We'll send someone when available." It was the same dismissive tone she'd heard before, the same tone that screamed, "You're on your own." But she wasn't backing down. Phone in hand, she snapped pictures of the damage, making sure every angle was documented. Evidence. Always collect evidence. That rule had saved her in court countless times. It would save her now. Just as she finished, a patrol car rolled slowly down the street. Mercer. Of course. He didn't even bother hiding it anymore. He leaned out the window, smug grin firmly in place. "Rough night, counselor?" He called mockingly. "Looks like someone doesn't like your attitude." Brielle stepped forward, rage tightening her throat. "Cut the crap, Mercer. You think this scares me? It only proves how desperate you are." Mercer's smile widened. "Desperate? Nah, just patient. You can only poke the bear so many times before it bites." Without another word, he drove off, the low growl of the engine fading into the night. Brielle stood rooted to the spot, heart pounding. He was escalating. And he was doing it openly, confident that no one would stop him. The next morning, Brielle filed another report with the police department. As expected, it went nowhere. No witnesses, no cameras, no urgency. Just another form filed away, forgotten, before the ink dried. Frustration boiled over as she returned to her office, determined to push forward with the lawsuit against the department. If Mercer wanted a war, she'd give him one. But fate had other plans. Late that night, Brielle returned, home from Malcolm's apartment, where they had spent hours strategizing. As she turned onto her street, headlights flared behind her. She glanced in the rearview mirror, another patrol car. Her stomach twisted. Not again. The sirens didn't flash this time. No lights, just the quiet hum of an engine following too. Closely, Brielle gripped the steering wheel tighter, mind racing. Do I drive home, pull over, keep going? She chose the latter, heart pounding in her chest. 2 blocks, 1 block, almost there. Suddenly, the patrol car accelerated, swerving in front of her SUV, forcing her to brake hard. Tires screeched. Her seatbelt dug into her shoulder as she jolted forward. Before she could react, Mercer was at her window, flashlight glaring in her face. Reed stood behind him, hand resting casually on his holster. "Out of the car, Thompson," Mercer ordered, voice sharp. Brielle's heart slammed against her ribs. "For what? You have no cause." Mercer's grin was wolfish. "Reckless driving, endangerment, take your pick." She hesitated, weighing her options. Fight here in the dark with no witnesses, or comply and hope she could de-escalate. Grinding her teeth, she slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out, hands raised. Mercer wasted no time. He shoved her against the hood of her SUV, twisting her arm behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder as cold metal bit into her wrists. Cuffed. Again. "This is harassment," Brielle snapped, struggling against his grip. "You're crossing the line, Mercer." Mercer leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "Line's already crossed, sweetheart, and no cameras this time. Just you and me." Reed chuckled behind. "Them." "Should have kept quiet, counselor." Panic bubbled in Brielle's chest. This was different. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. This was about power, about sending a message she couldn't ignore. Suddenly, the distant wail of a siren pierced the night. Another patrol car approaching fast. Mercer cursed under his breath, glancing toward the flashing lights. "Damn it! Let's go!" He shoved Brielle away roughly, the impact sending her stumbling to the pavement. Without another word, Mercer and Reed sprinted back to their car and sped off, tires squealing. Brielle sat on the cold concrete, wrists bruised, mind spinning. They'd been ready to take things further. If that siren hadn't come, her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Malcolm, Bree!" His voice was frantic. "I saw the squad car on your street. Are you okay?" Brielle swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into her voice. "I'm fine. But Mercer's done pretending. He's coming for blood." Silence hung heavy between them before Malcolm spoke again, voice tight with fear. "You can't fight this alone anymore, Brielle. It's bigger than you now." Brielle wiped at the blood trickling from a scrape on her palm, jaw tightening with resolve. She wasn't backing down, not now. Not ever. Comment number 1 if you believe Mercer has crossed the line and must be stopped. Like, subscribe and share if you believe no one should be above the law. But here's the real question. When the system itself protects the abuser, how do you fight back without losing everything? Can Brielle survive the next attack Mercer has planned? Stay tuned, because this battle is far from over. Brielle Thompson sat at her dining table, legal briefs spread out before her like pieces of a battlefield map. The bruises on her wrists from Mercer's handcuffs were fading, but the memory of his whispered threat lingered, sharp and raw. He had crossed the line, and now so would she. Enough was enough. The next morning, Brielle filed a federal lawsuit against the city and the police department, citing systemic harassment, abuse of power, and malicious prosecution. Her name, once tarnished by Mercer's smear campaign, now headlined articles championing her as a civil rights warrior standing up to corruption. The media picked up the story quickly. Civil rights attorney fights back against corrupt cops. Blared across news sites and television screens. It felt like a win, a surge of power, like she was finally turning the tide. But power doesn't go unchecked for long. The retaliation came swift and brutal. 2 days after the lawsuit hit the courts, Brielle was driving home from a client meeting when red and blue lights flickered behind her. Her stomach twisted. Not again. She pulled over, phone already in her hand, camera rolling. Officer Reed approached this time, not Mercer. His expression was cold, mechanical. "License and registration." Brielle kept her voice steady. "What's the reason for the stop?" "Officer Reed." "Routine check," he replied flatly. "Step out of the vehicle." Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. "I'm not stepping out until you provide a legitimate reason." Reed's gaze didn't waver. "Step out of the vehicle, Ms. Thompson, now." Heart pounding, Brielle slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and exited, phone held high to capture everything. Reed said nothing, just reached into her car, popped the glove compartment, and pulled out a small plastic baggie filled with white powder. Brielle froze. "What the hell is that?" Reed held it up for the camera. "Looks like possession of a controlled substance. You're under arrest." "No," Brielle snapped, stepping back. "This is a setup. That wasn't there." Reed didn't blink. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Brielle's mind raced. She hadn't even opened her glove compartment that day. There was no way, unless someone had access to her car. Someone like Mercer. As the cuffs snapped around her wrists, Brielle's phone tumbled to the pavement, still recording. The last thing the camera caught was Reed's smug smile. At the station, the atmosphere was different. Colder, more calculated. This wasn't about humiliation anymore. This was about erasure. She sat in the holding cell for hours, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Finally, Captain Morales appeared, face tight with worry. "This isn't sticking," Morales muttered, unlocking the cell. "The evidence chain is already compromised." "But Brielle, they're not just trying to scare you. They're trying to bury you." Brielle rubbed her wrists, the familiar ache returning. "Then I need to hit them harder," Morales hesitated. "You're playing with fire. Mercer's connected. He's got friends high up, and they're protecting him. You push any further, they'll come for everything." "I've already lost my job, my reputation, and my safety," Brielle said coldly. "What else can they take?" Morales didn't answer. She just stepped aside, letting Brielle walk free once again, bruised but unbroken. But the damage was done. News of the arrest spread like wildfire, feeding the narrative Mercer had so carefully crafted. Attorney arrested again. Drug charges raise questions about credibility. Clients vanished. Friends stopped calling. Even allies in the reform movement distanced themselves, unwilling to taint their causes with controversy. Back home, Brielle sat in the dark, Malcolm pacing beside her, phone buzzing with unanswered calls. "This isn't a fight anymore, Brie," Malcolm said, voice tight with fear. "It's a war, and they're winning." Brielle stared at her reflection in the window, jaw set. Not for long. That night, Malcolm, ever the tech-savvy journalist, dug into the precinct's internal system. He bypassed firewalls, sifted through encrypted files, and found what Brielle had long suspected but never been able to prove. A list, a watch list. Dozens of names. Activists, lawyers, journalists. Mostly black, mostly outspoken. Each name tagged with notes. Surveillance recommended. Priority stop if seen driving late hours. Known agitator. Escalation authorized. Brielle's name was circled in red. Ongoing, high priority. Neutralize by any means necessary. She stared at the screen, throat tightening. This wasn't just Mercer. This was a coordinated effort. Her system designed to crush dissent before it could spark change. "We have them," Brielle whispered, snapping a photo of the screen with her phone. "This is bigger than I thought." Malcolm looked up, eyes dark with concern. "We need to leak this, now." Brielle hesitated. If they released the list, it would ignite a scandal that could take down more than just Mercer. It could expose the entire chain of command that had enabled this corruption for years, but it would also put an even bigger target on her back. "I'm not leaking everything," she decided. "Not yet. We show just enough to force their hand, make them sweat." That night, an anonymous tip landed in the inboxes of every major news outlet in the city. Attached was a single screenshot from the watch list, redactions carefully placed to protect those not yet ready to be exposed. The headline broke at dawn. "Whistleblower reveals police watch list targeting activists and reform leaders." The city exploded. Protests flared. City officials scrambled to control the narrative. And Mercer vanished from patrol duty, his name suddenly absent from the precinct roster. Brielle sat back, exhausted but triumphant. It felt like a victory. For the first time in weeks, the weight on her chest lifted, but victories like this never come without consequence. That night, as she locked her apartment door, her phone buzzed with a blocked number. "Think you won, Thompson?" Mercer's voice rasped through the speaker, low and venomous. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The line went dead. Brielle stood frozen in the dim light of her hallway, heart hammering against her ribs. She had drawn blood. But the beast wasn't dead yet. It was wounded, angry, and more dangerous than ever. Brielle Thompson sat in her dimly lit apartment, the only light coming from her laptop screen. The leaked screenshot had ignited a firestorm. News outlets dissected every detail of the police watch list. Civil rights groups called for immediate investigations, and city officials scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. But Brielle knew the truth. Mercer wasn't finished. His call from the night before still echoed in her mind. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Her phone buzzed. "Malcolm." Again. She answered, voice tight. "I'm fine." "No." "You're not," Malcolm snapped. "Mercer's gone dark. His buddies are laying low. You don't think they're planning something?" Brielle pinched the bridge of her nose. Exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. "Of course they are, but I'm not running." "You need to leave town," Malcolm urged. "Lay low until the review board steps in." Brielle's jaw clenched. "If I run, they win. This isn't just about me anymore." The next few days were a blur of interviews, press conferences, and emergency meetings with her legal team. Every moment was calculated, every word weighed against the risk of further retaliation. But the more attention Brielle drew, the more isolated she became. Friends stopped calling. Allies in the city council went silent. Even Captain Morales, once a reluctant supporter, avoided her gaze during briefings. Late one night, after another exhausting meeting, Brielle drove home from Malcolm's apartment. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet. Her SUV's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating empty sidewalks and shuttered storefronts. That's when she noticed it. Same patrol car. No lights, no sirens, just trailing her, like a predator stalking its prey. Brielle's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Keep driving. Don't panic." Block after block, the car followed. When she turned left, it turned left. When she sped up, it matched her speed. This wasn't coincidence. This was calculated. Brielle's mind raced. She couldn't lead them to her apartment. Instead, she veered toward the downtown district, where streetlights were brighter and late-night traffic offered some semblance of safety. But Mercer had other plans. Without warning, the patrol car surged forward, cutting her off at the next intersection. Brielle slammed on the brakes, tires screeching against the asphalt. Before she could react, Mercer was at her door, flashlight beaming directly into her face. "Out of the car, Thompson," he barked, voice cold and controlled. Brielle's breath caught. "What's the charge this time, Mercer?" "Existing while..." "Plaque?" Mercer didn't smile, he didn't need to. "Reckless driving, step out now." Heart hammering, Brielle hit record on her phone and slowly opened the door. The second her feet hit the pavement, Mercer grabbed her arm and yanked her forward, slamming her against the hood of her SUV. The phone tumbled from her grip, landing face down on the ground. "Mercer!" she gasped, struggling against his iron grip. "You're out of control." "Control?" Mercer hissed, pressing her harder against the metal. "You lost control the moment you dragged my name through the mud." Another figure emerged from the patrol car. Reed. His expression was blank, almost bored, as if this was just another routine stop. "Cuff her," Mercer ordered, voice steady. "No cameras this time, no witnesses, just the way it should have been from the start." Brielle's stomach dropped. This wasn't an arrest. This was an abduction under the cover of night. Reed moved toward her, handcuffs glinting in the dim light. Brielle thrashed, adrenaline flooding her veins. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," she shouted. Mercer leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "No, Thompson. You did that when you didn't know when to quit." Suddenly, the crackle of a radio interrupted the moment. "Unit 4, status check. You've been off-grid for 10 minutes. Mercer froze, grip tightening on Brielle's arm. Reed hesitated, handcuffs dangling uselessly. The radio crackled again, more urgent. This time, "Unit 4, respond immediately or backup will be dispatched to your location." Mercer's face twisted with rage. He shoved Brielle away, sending her sprawling onto the pavement. "Get in the damn car," he snapped at Reed. Without another word, they scrambled back into the patrol car and sped off, tires squealing as they disappeared into the night. Brielle lay there for a moment, chest heaving, gravel digging into her palms. She had been seconds away from vanishing without a trace, just another unsolved incident swept under the rug. Slowly, she crawled toward her phone, screen still glowing faintly. The recording was still running, audio capturing every word, every threat. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was attempted kidnapping, and she had proof. Back at her apartment, Malcolm paced frantically while Brielle applied ice to her bruised wrists. "This ends now," he growled. "We leak the whole list, the full file, no more redactions. People need to know how deep this goes." Brielle nodded, grim determination settling over her like armor. "Do it. Burn it all down." Within hours, the full watch list, names, notes, surveillance orders, hit every major news platform and social media site. The internet exploded. Hashtags trended worldwide. Protests reignited with renewed fury, this time not just calling for Mercer's badge, but for a complete overhaul of the city's police leadership. But power doesn't fall without a fight. At dawn, Brielle's phone buzzed with a new message. No name, just a photo. Her brother Malcolm standing outside his apartment, a red laser dot centered on his chest. Below it, a single line, "Stand down, or he's next." Brielle's blood turned to ice. They weren't just coming for her anymore. They were coming for her family. Comment number 1 if you believe Brielle should expose everything, no matter the risk. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe corruption like this must be stopped at all costs. But here's the real question. When the people you love are dragged into the crossfire, how far is too far? Can Brielle protect her family without losing? The fight for justice? Stay tuned, because this battle is about to turn deadly. Brielle Thompson stared at the photo on her phone, heart pounding so hard it drowned out every other sound. Malcolm standing in front of his apartment, frozen in time by a camera she couldn't see. The red laser dot on his chest was unmistakable. Stand down, or he's next. Her breath came in shallow gasps as the implications sank in. They had crossed the final line. It was no longer just about her reputation, her career, or even her safety. Mercer and his allies were now targeting her family. "Malcolm!" Brielle rasped, scrambling to her feet, phone slipping from her hand. She hit the speed dial, pacing the length of her apartment like a caged animal. He answered after the second ring. "Brielle, what's wrong?" "Get inside. Now!" she snapped, voice sharp with panic. "Lock the doors. Close the blinds. Someone's watching you." There was a brief pause, then the sound of footsteps as Malcolm hurried inside. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. Brielle's hands trembled as she pulled up the photo and sent it to him. "Check your phone." Seconds later, she heard his sharp intake of breath. "Jesus Christ," Malcolm muttered. This is Mercer, isn't it?" "Not just him," Brielle said, mind racing. "This is bigger. He's just the blunt instrument, the real power's behind the badge, in the system that keeps him untouchable." Her front door rattled suddenly, and Brielle froze. A soft knock followed, 3 quick taps, then silence. She crept to the peephole, heart hammering. Captain Morales stood there, shoulders hunched, glancing nervously over her shoulder as if expecting someone to follow her. Brielle yanked the door open. "Morales, what the hell are you doing here?" The captain stepped inside quickly, shutting the door behind her. Her face was pale, lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't have long," she said, voice low. "Mercer's gone completely rogue. He's not following orders anymore. He's settling scores. Your name's at the top of his list." Brielle's mouth went dry. "I know. They just threatened my brother." Morales cursed under her breath, running a hand through her hair. "I tried to warn the brass, but they're covering for him. As long as the heat's on the department, they'll look the other way. Mercer knows it. That's why he's getting bolder." Brielle's fists clenched. "So, what do we do? Wait until he pulls the trigger? Hope the system that's protecting him suddenly grows a conscience?" Morales hesitated, then handed Brielle a flash drive. "This is everything I could pull without setting off alarms. Internal emails, complaint records they buried, communications between precinct heads and city officials, proof they've been shielding Mercer and others like him." Brielle stared at the drive. It was the smoking gun she'd been chasing for weeks. This could blow the whole thing wide open. "Or get you killed," Morales countered grimly. "If you go public with this, Mercer won't just threaten you. He'll come for blood, and this time he won't miss." Brielle's phone buzzed again. Another message, another photo. This time it was her apartment building. The laser dot wasn't on Malcolm anymore, it was on her window. "They're watching me," Brielle murmured, voice hollow. "Right now," Morales cursed again. "Pack a bag. You need to disappear. Tonight." Brielle didn't move. Her mind was a whirlwind. Of fear, fury, and defiance. Running meant surrender. Staying meant risking everything. But there was a third option. "Malcolm," she said, snatching her phone off the table and putting it on speaker. "Get to my apartment. Now. We're ending this." Her brother didn't argue. 10 minutes later, he was at her door, breathless and pale. "You better have a plan, Brie." Brielle held up the flash drive. "We don't just leak this, we broadcast it. Live." If we give it to the media, the department will spin it, bury it. But if we control the narrative, if we show the public everything in real time, they can't ignore it, not this time. Malcolm's eyes widened. You want to go live with proof of systemic corruption, while the people you're exposing are literally aiming guns at us? Brielle's gaze hardened. Yes. Morales exhaled sharply. You're insane. Insane would be letting them get away with this, Brielle shot back. Are you in or not? There was a beat of silence, then Morales nodded slowly. Hell, let's burn it down. They worked quickly. Malcolm set up multiple devices for live streaming across platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, each one angled to show Brielle standing in front of a wall covered with documents, screenshots, and names. Morales stood by the window, gun drawn, eyes scanning the street below. At exactly 9 p.m., Brielle stepped into frame, heart pounding but voice steady. My name is Brielle Thompson. I'm a civil rights attorney, and if you're watching this, it means I've survived long enough to tell you the truth. She held up the flash drive. This contains proof of systemic corruption within the Danton Police Department, proof that officers like Kyle Mercer have been protected while terrorizing innocent people. Proof that city officials knew and did nothing. One by one, Malcolm projected the documents onto the screen behind her. Complaint logs marked unsubstantiated, despite clear evidence. Emails between commanding officers discussing how to discredit whistleblowers. Surveillance lists targeting activists and community leaders. And it doesn't stop there, Brielle continued, voice rising with controlled fury. They didn't just watch us, they threatened us, planted evidence. Destroyed lives, they threatened my family. Her eyes locked on the camera. And if you're wondering whether they'll come for me after this broadcast, they already have. She stepped aside, revealing the photo of Malcolm with the laser dot on his chest. The comment section exploded in real time. This is insane. Protect her. Where is the DOJ? But Brielle wasn't finished. To Officer Mercer, she said coldly, to every cop, official, and leader who thought they could silence me, you've lost. This story belongs to the world now. The truth is out. The stream ended. Silence filled the room. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Malcolm's phone buzzed. Look outside, the text read. Morales peeked through the blinds, breath hitching. Black SUV unmarked. 2 men inside, they're not here to talk. Brielle didn't hesitate. She grabbed the laptop and the backup drives. We go now. They slipped out the back entrance, sticking to the shadows. The SUV idled for a moment longer, then peeled away, heading straight for Brielle's apartment. As they rounded the corner, the night sky lit up behind them. An explosion rocked the ground, sending shards of glass raining down. Brielle didn't look back. She already knew. They had just blown up her home, and they weren't done yet. The blast from Brielle's apartment echoed down the street, shaking windows and setting off car alarms. Smoke billowed into the night sky as flames licked the shattered remains of her home. Brielle, Malcolm, and Captain Morales crouched behind. A dumpster in the alley, hearts pounding in unison. That was meant for us, Malcolm whispered, voice hoarse with shock. They were going to kill us. Morales gripped her service weapon tighter, eyes darting toward the street. No, she corrected grimly. They were going to erase you. Brielle's mind raced. They'd pushed Mercer into a corner, and now he wasn't just fighting to protect his reputation. He was fighting for survival. Exposing the corruption had made her a target, but it had also made Mercer desperate. Desperate men made mistakes. She exhaled slowly. We finish this tonight. Malcolm shot her a look like she'd lost her mind. Finish it? They just blew up your apartment, Brie. What's next? A bullet in the back of your head. Not. If we control the board, Brielle snapped. Her gaze locked with Morales. You said Mercer's gone rogue. He's not following orders anymore. That means he's vulnerable. Morales hesitated, then nodded slowly. If he's operating outside the system, he's lost his shield. No badge, no backup. He's running on fear and ego. Brielle pulled out her phone, shaking ash from the screen. The live stream had done its job. The internet was ablaze with calls for action. Civil rights groups, journalists, and politicians were demanding accountability. But headlines weren't enough. Mercer needed to be exposed firsthand, in real time, with no room for spin. Malcolm, Brielle said, voice sharp with resolve. "Can you track Mercer's phone?" Her brother blinked. "Track a cop's personal device? Are you serious?" "Can you do it?" she pressed. Malcolm hesitated for only a moment before sighing. "If he's dumb enough to leave his location services on, maybe." He pulled out his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. Morales kept watch, her radio silent, a chilling indication that Mercer's allies had gone dark too. No one wanted to be associated with this mess until the dust settled. After what felt like an eternity, Malcolm muttered, "Got him." Brielle leaned over his shoulder. A blinking dot appeared on the map, hovering near an abandoned warehouse on the industrial side of town. "That's not a patrol route," Morales noted, frowning. "That's a dead zone. No cameras, no foot traffic." "Exactly," Brielle said, jaw tightening. "He's hiding, which means he's scared." Malcolm stared at her, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "You're not seriously suggesting we go there?" Brielle met his gaze unflinching. "We don't have a choice. If Mercer disappears now, he'll regroup. The next time he comes for us, we won't see it coming." Morales swore under her breath but holstered her weapon. "We do this smart, quiet. Get the confession, get out, no heroics." Brielle nodded. "Deal." They moved fast, weaving through side streets and alleys, avoiding main roads where Mercer's remaining allies might be patrolling off the books. The city felt eerily quiet, like the calm before a storm. The warehouse loomed ahead, rusted and forgotten, a relic of Danton's industrial past. One flickering light illuminated the entrance, casting jagged shadows across cracked concrete. Malcolm checked his laptop again. He's inside, alone. Brielle's heart pounded as she adjusted the hidden camera pinned to her jacket. Morales positioned herself by the entrance, gun drawn but low, ready for anything. "I'll draw him out," Brielle murmured. "He won't be able to resist." Before they could protest, she stepped into the light, voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Mercer, it's over. You've lost." For a moment, nothing happened. Then footsteps echoed from within, slow and deliberate. Mercer emerged from the shadows, gun already drawn, face twisted with fury and exhaustion. "Brave of you to show up, Thompson," he sneered, weapon never wavering. "After all, you've been running your mouth long enough. Thought you'd be smarter than this." Brielle stood her ground, hands raised but eyes locked on his. "Running my mouth? No, Mercer. I was telling the truth. The whole world knows now. Your department won't protect you anymore." Mercer chuckled, the sound hollow and bitter. "The world forgets. Headlines fade, but you? You're a problem I can solve permanently." He stepped closer, and Brielle didn't flinch. "Go ahead," she said coldly. "Shoot me. Right here. On camera." She tapped her jacket, where the tiny red light blinked steadily. Mercer froze. His eyes flickered to the light, realization dawning too late. "You're live, Mercer," Brielle continued, voice like steel. "Every word, every threat. Broadcast to thousands. You can't spin this, you can't bury it. Your career, your freedom, gone." Mercer's hand trembled. For the first time, Brielle saw fear crack through his bravado. He'd built his power on silence, shadows, and systemic protection. Now stripped of all that, he was just another man with a gun and no escape. "You think this ends with me?" Mercer growled, lowering the weapon inch by inch. "I'm not the only one, there are more. You take me down, someone else fills the void." Brielle stepped closer, eyes burning. "Maybe, but you'll be the example. The face of everything. That's wrong. And when they see you fall, others will think twice." The weight of defeat settled into Mercer's features. He knew it was over. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably a panicked call from whatever ally still had his back. He didn't answer. Morales stepped from the shadows, gun trained on him. "Drop it, Mercer, now." For a moment, Brielle thought he might fight, that he'd rather go out in a blaze than face the consequences. But the flickering red light on her jacket, the unblinking eye of accountability, broke him. The gun clattered to the ground. Morales moved in, cuffing him swiftly. "Kyle Mercer, you're under arrest for conspiracy, harassment, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt that'll help you now." Brielle exhaled shakily, knees nearly buckling with relief. It was done. The monster was caged. As they led Mercer away, his final words echoed back. "You think you won, Thompson? You'll never kill the whole system." Brielle stood tall, heart steady. Maybe not, but I'll make damn sure it never sleeps easy. Again. The flashing lights of arriving patrol cars painted the warehouse walls in red and blue. This time, those colors didn't symbolize fear. They signaled justice, long overdue. The flashing lights outside the warehouse bathed everything in a harsh, surreal glow. Kyle Mercer, wrists bound in handcuffs, stood stiffly between two officers who avoided his glare. His badge, once a symbol of unchecked power, now dangled uselessly. From his belt as they shoved him into the back of a patrol car, Brielle Thompson stood silently, arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching as Mercer's mask of arrogance cracked. His eyes met hers through the window, burning with hatred. He mouthed something, but the words were lost in the noise of dispatch radios and idling engines. "What's he saying?" Malcolm muttered, stepping up beside her. Brielle didn't need to hear it. She already knew. "This isn't over." "Captain," Morales approached, face drawn but determined. "He's booked. Charges are stacking up fast. Conspiracy, harassment, attempted abduction, obstruction of justice. The DA's office is already involved. He won't see daylight for a long time." Brielle nodded, the weight on her chest lifting ever so slightly. It was progress. Not a full victory. There were still others in the system who had protected Mercer for years, but the first domino had fallen. "Go home," Morales urged. "Both of you. This fight's done." But Brielle knew better. Corruption didn't collapse overnight. It lashed out like a wounded animal, dangerous until its last breath. She and Malcolm returned to the safe house, a small rental Morales had arranged under a friend's name. They were off the grid now, phones wiped, location services disabled. Exhaustion hung over them like a fog, but sleep refused to come. Malcolm paced the small living room, running a hand through his hair. "We did it, Brie. He's done. The department's scrambling to distance itself. The mayor's calling for an independent review board. It's happening." Brielle leaned against the kitchen counter, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. "It's not enough," she murmured. "Mercer was a symptom. The disease is still there. How many other cops like him are cleaning house right now? Deleting files, intimidating witnesses, covering tracks." Her phone buzzed. An encrypted message from an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. "You think one arrest changes anything? Look outside." Heart pounding, Brielle rushed to the window, careful to stay behind the curtain's edge. Across the street, a black SUV idled, headlights off. A figure sat in the driver's seat, face obscured by shadows. "Malcolm," she whispered, stepping back. "We've got company." He joined her at the window, face hardening. Mercer's people? Maybe. Or someone higher up cleaning loose ends. Brielle's mind raced. Mercer might have fallen, but the system he served was still alive, still dangerous. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "Last chance, walk away." Brielle's breath hitched. The threat was clear. Exposing Mercer had pulled the curtain back, but now the people truly in power were tightening their grip. Malcolm grabbed his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. "I'm pulling traffic cam footage. Let's see who they really are." Brielle stood frozen, heart thudding in her chest. She'd won the battle, but the war was far from over. The system was fighting back, and this time it wasn't sending foot soldiers. It was sending cleaners. The SUV didn't move. It sat there for hours, engine idling like a predator, waiting for its prey to stumble. Finally, just before dawn, it pulled away, disappearing into the city's labyrinth of streets. Brielle exhaled slowly. It wasn't over. It might never be over. The next morning, headlines blared across every major news outlet. Corrupt officer arrested in wake of whistleblower expose. City promises, sweeping reform after explosive live stream. Who watches the watchman? Investigation expands into entire precinct. But Brielle knew better than to celebrate. Headlines faded, power endured. Later that afternoon, as she stepped out of the safe house to meet her lawyer, a manila envelope lay on the doorstep. No return address, no markings. She picked it up cautiously, heart in her throat. Inside was a single photo. Her brother Malcolm sipping coffee at a local cafe that morning, unaware, exposed. Beneath the photo, one word was scrawled in red ink. Next, Brielle's hand tightened around the envelope, knuckles whitening. They weren't finished, and now neither was she. Brielle Thompson sat in the governor's office, hands folded neatly on the table, her posture unshaken despite the storm raging outside these walls. Across from her, Governor Jameson Richardson rubbed his temples, exhaustion lining his face. The weight of the past few weeks had landed squarely in his lap, and he knew it. "This is bad," Richardson muttered, staring at the documents Brielle had placed in front of him. "It's worse than bad, it's systemic." Brielle leaned forward, her voice measured but firm. "It's been systemic for years. The only difference now is that people are watching. The world is watching." The evidence was damning. Files recovered from the precinct's deleted servers, hidden complaints against officers with repeat offenses, and the names of those in leadership who had looked the other way. Mercer might have been the hammer, but he wasn't the architect. Richardson exhaled heavily. "What do you propose?" Brielle didn't hesitate. "Immediate suspension of every officer named in these files while an independent investigation takes place. A federal oversight committee to review past arrests and convictions. And every officer in this city undergoes mandatory anti-bias training, starting from the top down." The governor studied her for a long moment. "You know there will be pushback. The police union will fight this. Some of my own party will say it's overreach." "Let them," Brielle said coldly. "Because if you don't act now, the next headline won't just be about a corrupt cop getting exposed. It'll be about how the governor knew and did nothing." A long silence stretched between them. Then Richardson picked up the phone and made the call. Later that afternoon, Brielle sat in a quiet coffee shop, fingers wrapped around a warm mug. She should have felt victorious. The city was reeling from the fallout. Several high-ranking officers had resigned, and federal investigators were already combing through files. Mercer's trial was pending, and the mayor had announced sweeping reforms, and yet there was no relief. Across from her, Malcolm scrolled through his phone, scanning headlines. Looks like they're already spinning the narrative. A few bad apples. Necessary changes. The usual nonsense. He looked up, his expression tired but proud. "You did it, Brie." Brielle shook her head. "No, we cracked the door open. But this fight, it never really ends." Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. "Look outside." Brielle stiffened. Her eyes flicked to the window. A patrol car sat idling across the street, lights off, watching. Malcolm followed her gaze, his expression darkening. "Think it's Mercer's people?" Brielle took a slow sip of her coffee, her mind already calculating the next move. Maybe. Or maybe it's just a reminder. She placed the mug down, straightened her blazer, and met the car's gaze head on. They were watching. But now, so was she. The story of Brielle Thompson is more than just one woman's fight against corruption. It's a stark reminder of the cost of standing up to injustice. It exposes a truth many already know, but few are willing to confront. Systems of power don't crumble from a single victory. They resist, retaliate, and rebuild unless constantly held accountable. Brielle's journey highlights that change requires more than outrage. It demands resilience, strategy, and sacrifice. She lost her home, her sense of safety, and nearly her brother's life. But she gained something more powerful, a platform to force the system to face itself. Her story is proof that silence enables oppression, while persistence, even in the face of danger, can shift the tide. Importantly, the story underscores another reality. No one fights alone. From Malcolm's tech expertise to Captain Morales's reluctant but crucial support, every win against corruption was fueled by collective action. True reform isn't just about one whistleblower or one court case. It's about communities standing together, demanding better, and refusing to accept the status quo. But the fight isn't over. Brielle's victory exposed one precinct, one corrupt officer, one flawed system. How many more lie in the shadows, protected by the silence of those who benefit from oppression? How many lives have been quietly destroyed without the world ever noticing? This brings us to the question you need to answer. What would you do if you were in Brielle's shoes? Would you fight knowing the cost? Or would you walk away hoping someone else would step up? Comment number 1 if you believe fighting for justice is worth the risk. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe no one should be above the law and every voice deserves to be heard. Thank you for watching, for thinking critically, and for standing on the side of truth. Stay safe, stay aware, and never stop asking the hard questions. Change starts with all of us. Until next time, take care and keep fighting for what's right.